Cloak of Obscurity, Chapter 3, Rude Awakenings. I suppose I didn't feel any worse than I should have expected the next morning when I woke up. My tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth, and I could have sworn somebody was hammering a nail into my right temple. I wondered for a few minutes why I was lying on the floor tangled in my cloak instead of in my bed, rolling stiffly onto my back and prying one gummy eye open. I thought about how drunk I must have been. I flapped a hand about, reaching for the cat. "Silk," I croaked. "Kitty, kitty." A purring grayness thrust itself under my fingers. I administered the standard morning ear rubbing with one hand, holding the rest of my body as still as possible. "Did I wake you, Master?" Soft as it was, the unexpected voice jolted me so that my heart, my stomach, and everything in it, and a few other vital organs, tried to jump out of my mouth. I tried to sit up and failed, flopping like a fish on the docks. My insides lurched again. I decided not to move. "Are you sick, Master Edward?" Lee asked. I waved a hand at the boy. "I'll be all right," I said. Just let me be for a minute." I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, drawing sunlight and health with each breath, exhaling my queasiness and feeling it drain out of me down through the floor like a shadow. Once I began to feel human again, I rolled over and rose. First to all fours, then to my knees, and finally to my feet, swaying gently, one hand against the wall and the other clutching my stomach. It was a beautiful performance. Lee showed more concern than I deserved. "Can I get you anything?" he asked. I waved to my shelves. "Bottle, glass, green stuff, bottom shelf." He gave it to me. I uncorked it. It frothed a little, startling the elf. I drank it gratefully, reflecting that if I'd had the presence of mind to take it the night before, I wouldn't be feeling quite so wretched now. Once the belching had subsided, unfortunate side effect, I decided I didn't feel like going down to the hall. So I just pissed out the window again, and then turned my attention to Lee, who had buried his face in my bedding. "Oh, sorry," I said. I'd forgotten how shy some young fellows were. He peeped up at me with one eye, then, seeing I was decent once more, sat up. His face was an interesting shade of deep mahogany. Before I'd met Lee, I hadn't thought elves could blush. "Well," I said, hooking my thumbs into my sash, "now you've seen me at my absolute worst. If you still want to trust your life to me, you can explain what happened to Allison again. I'm sorry to say I didn't quite catch everything last night. I just come from my sister's wedding, and my family is not known for temperance." "I thought you might have been drinking," Lee said with a shy smile. I chuckled. Anyone with a nose could tell I'd been drinking. I glanced down sorrowfully at my silk coat. It was stained with sweat and spilled food and wine, and somehow several gold buttons had come undone. "Excuse me, I've got to get out of this. Just tell me what happened while I try to make myself presentable." As I peeled out of my filthy coat and shirt and started washing myself, Lee began his story. "Allison hadn't been herself since her father died last week. Weepy, short-tempered. She'd loved her father. They'd been all each other had since her mother died." Lee paused and shrugged. "At least that's what Dolores said." "But I know she and her father fought over her betrothal," I said, scrubbing myself with a soapy rag and wishing for the luxury of a bathtub. I noticed that Lee was sitting cross-legged on the bed with his face to the window, his back squarely towards me. I smiled. Dolores figured they would have worked it out somehow. One or the other would have given in eventually. The strange thing is, now that Master Roger is dead, Allison is, well, she was, quarreling with Malcolm. About the marriage? I asked. Lee shrugged. I don't know. But 2 days ago, they had a terrible fight upstairs in Master Roger's old bedroom. Dolores and I could hear them shouting. Could you make out what they were saying? I asked. No, we were down in the kitchen, but it must have been something awful because one of them broke the window, and Allison came rushing downstairs in tears and ran out of the house. Then Malcolm came storming down with a dreadful look on his face, and he ran after her. That was the last time I saw Allison alive. I hesitated before voicing the obvious conclusion. I hate to even suggest this, but you don't think Malcolm could have killed her, do you? I can't imagine, Lee said, his back still to me. You know, you can look at me, I said. I can't believe I'm that hideous with my shirt off. The elf peeked back over his shoulder. Malcolm is proud and jealous, he said, but hurt Allison? Never. He loved her. Well, where is he now? I asked. Has anyone seen him since the fight? I don't know. I haven't seen him, but I don't know where he was. I tried another approach. All right, Lee, where were you that night? What were you doing? Is there anyone who can speak for you? No. No one anyone would listen to anyway, even if they did speak, which they wouldn't, he said, staring at the ground. Why not? I'm a half-breed. What? I said stupidly. My father was Shanshu. He wasn't an elf. They don't want me. Who? The elves? You were with them? Yes, he sighed, but they won't speak for me. How can you be sure of that? I asked. I could ask them. Oh, they probably won't even talk to you, Lee said, shaking his head. Not that I'm trying to be rude, but we don't just go about trusting your kind. Our trust must be earned, and that isn't easy. A pounding at the door interrupted us. Eddie! Eddie? You said you'd help with the morning fish delivery. Well, it's morning, and I've got an absolute mess of fish down here. Trying to recall exactly when I'd made that promise, I called, I'm coming, Sadie. Be down in a moment. I motioned the boy to be silent, dragged my coat back on, and went back into the hall. Oh, flesh and blood, Eddie, you look awful, declared Sadie helpfully. And what was that ruckus in your room last night? I told you, I said, trudging down the corridor. I sat on a cat. I was drunk. Sadie chuckled disapprovingly. I tell you, you're still too thin, Eddie. Get a bit more meat on your bones and you'll be able to handle your liquor. Now just look at Lant and me. We can drink a pirate crew under the table, just the two of us. I have no doubt, I said. I figured they outweighed a pirate crew, just the two of them. Sadie needed help unloading a cart full of fresh fish into her kitchens. My job was to levitate the entire mess, a dozen or so fish at a time, onto her countertops and into buckets. Between my worrying about Lee's predicament and Sadie bustling about asking me questions, it wasn't easy to concentrate on work. Plus, the entire staff had to stop whatever they were doing and stare at Eddie and his flying fish. Every time someone jostled me or broke my concentration, down flopped a pile of fish into the floor, some of them still alive and wriggling. The cats were all very enthusiastic about this, but I wasn't, especially when the cook started laughing at me, which broke my concentration even further, and I had to grab the damn things with my hands. It was even harder to avoid Sadie's gratitude. Dripping with sweat and stinking of fish slime, All I wanted to do was go back to my room, wash up again, and continue talking with Lee. Sadie, however, wouldn't let me go without breakfast. "Oh, here, lambkin, this'll cure what ails you," she said, as she thumped down a lumpy gray mound of pork brains and scrambled eggs before me. The rich aroma of cooking lard hit my nose in a wave. My stomach, still recovering from the previous night's excesses and none too happy over the fish episode, lurched dangerously. I smiled wanly at Sadie and began pushing the food around with my spoon. Thanks, St. Phoebe, for Sadie's dog. When I returned to my room, Lee was gone. I considered panicking, thought better of it, decided he must have climbed out the window, and went back downstairs to look for him. He was in the tavern playing with the dog, as if nothing were wrong. Anna waggled past with a tray. "Lee's here for a lesson," she murmured, as if it were not unusual for the boy to show up at that hour. "Good morning, Master Edward," said Lee. Good day, Lee." I wanted to get out of sight and back to talking about the murder. The books are all still upstairs. Come with me," I said aloud. In a hiss, I whispered, "Why didn't you stay put?" Lee hissed back, "You were gone so long. I thought something had happened to you. I was scared." "Are you even thinking?" I whispered. I doubted he was. Panic didn't help anyone think straight. "Now the entire tavern knows you're here. You should have stayed put. But I was so afraid that..." Before he could tell me what he'd been afraid of, a loud voice called, "There! There he is!" And the tavern was invaded by the blue and white liveried forms of the city guard. As Sadie's customers sat and stared, slack-jawed, I silently cursed her fish and the nets they'd been caught in for delaying me. "Good men, what seems to be the problem?" I said to the guards, as I tried to shield Lee with my body. "That elf," said their captain, an officious little man with a very large sword, "is charged with murder. I'm taking him in." "You mean in the death of Allison Cobbler?" I asked. Lee's immediate danger had sobered me as no spell could. Everyone knew what happened to young boys in prison. "He already told me about her death, and he claims to be innocent." "And you believe him?" The guard's eyes narrowed. "I should like to have some proof before a boy this young is thrown into prison to be raped by every cut purse in the city," I replied. Lee, clinging to my sleeve, gasped, "Please, Master, please don't let them take me. I'd rather die than go to prison." His voice cracked. His slate blue eyes were wide with horror and bright with tears. Once again, I was struck by how frightfully young he seemed. "Good man," I continued in my most persuasive tones, "surely you see that this person is hardly more than a child. He hasn't even got his first beard yet. How could you believe he could have beaten Allison Cobbler to death?" "I'd believe anything of a dirty brown elf," said the captain. I forced myself to ignore that and shrugged. "I think we all want the same thing here, justice for Allison, and for that we need the truth. Please, if I could just speak to young Lee alone for a few moments, just over there in the chimney corner, you can watch us." "Why, you do what?" said the captain. "Work out a story between the two of you?" "Oh, I never!" exclaimed Sadie from outside the ring of blue tabards, drawn from the kitchen by the sounds of argument. By now everyone in the tavern was clustered around us, staring. Sadie, Anna, the few early morning customers, and last night's guests. Even old Nat had trundled in from the brewery, his heavy stick thumping on the floor. "What's this?" he shouted. "What are they accusing our wizard of?" "No one's accusing me of anything," I answered. "Yet," said the captain with a particularly disdainful look. "After all, we know how thick wizards are with those brownies, And if this one's a murderer, murderer, Sadie retorted, our little Lee. You'd sooner see a kitten kill someone as this child. And our Eddie would never harm a soul. He's like a son to me. Nat, Anna, and several regulars chimed in with their agreement. I would have been flattered if I hadn't been so annoyed. Quiet, I shouted. Please, everyone. I can speak for myself. I turned back to the guard. As I was known to the unfortunate young lady and her family, I am sure that you want to know where I was on the night of St. Michael's Eve. I was with my kinsmen, and they will be pleased to tell you so if you ask them. Now, may I please speak to Lee? I think at that point the captain realized that he and his half-dozen men were outnumbered by my tavern friends, who might have been old and fat, but who were also carrying a number of heavy sticks, trays, tankards, and so on. Sadie in particular was hefting her rolling pin as if she'd relish cracking a few heads. The captain said, You may speak to the boy, but make it quick. I pulled Lee through the crowd to sit next to me in one of the high-backed fireside chairs. Hopefully it would keep the others from overhearing us. Lee, tell me who you were with that night. He stared at the floor. None of them will speak for me. And even if you could convince them to, the guards wouldn't listen. You hear the way they think. Not everyone in the city is like that, I assured him. Someone will listen. Now, what were you doing with the elves? Well, Midsummer Eve, St. Michael's, you call it. We worship too, you know, in our own way. We were all out in a pasture on the other side of the South Bridge, watching the stars and smoking mosh. The word made no sense to me. Smoking what? I asked. It's an herb. You burn it and you breathe the smoke and it... He paused. It's hard to explain. It does something to your mind. You see things differently or more clearly or something. Wait, you're telling me that your alibi for the night that Allison disappeared is that you and 100 other elves were wandering about intoxicated in a cow pasture? See, he cried, how can I talk to them if even you won't understand? I said, I believe you. Well, I mean, I'm sure you're not lying, but I don't understand what in the world you were doing. He snorted. You've told me your mother's uncle was a priest of your god, and you don't understand a worship ceremony? Well, yes, I protested, but we don't get drunk in ours. Well, most of ours, I amended, considering some of the feasts of St. Cyprian I'd attended. No, you just get drunk all the rest of the time, Lee snapped. Ouch. That hurt. I don't even know why I came to you, he continued, his voice squeaking in anger. I knew about the wedding. I should have known you'd be too soused to see straight. I should have just left town. The absolute silence in the rest of the hall assured me our argument was proving very entertaining. I sighed and returned to face the captain. Lee has informed me he spent the evening in the company of his mother's people. So we heard, said the captain, smirking. Yes. Well, I'm certain we can go down to the elves' quarter and find any number of witnesses who will vouch for his presence with them that night. We, the captain repeated. Do you have a mouse in your pocket? I'll go with you, I insisted, to ensure that Lee doesn't escape. The captain shook his head. Doesn't work that way, wizard. I have my orders. The brownie goes to jail. Now, I've always wasted too much time letting you talk. But Lee's just a baby, exclaimed Sadie, pushing into our argument. You can't throw this child in prison. That's right, put in a man. More voices cried out agreement. I noticed for the first time how many people had gathered outside the tavern while I had talked to Lee. The 6 guards were fingering the hilts of their swords, preparing to fight, I fought back a sense of panic. The last thing I wanted was a riot in the Snake and Egg. People would get hurt. Lee among them. Sadie, everybody. Calm down, I said. Captain, if you could at least permit me to accompany you and the boy to the prison and speak to the jailer on his behalf. Bribery, as everyone knew, was a time-honored tradition among the city guards. The captain snorted disdainfully but agreed. I patted Lee on the shoulder, then froze with the realization that I had no money for bribes. Damn, I thought. What am I thinking? Am I still drunk? They say drunkards stick together, though, and in this case it was true. Old Nat pushed his way through the crowd to my side. He slipped a purse into my hand while appearing to offer sage advice. Take care of the lad, Eddie, he said. The missus is fond of the little mite. I had never imagined someone as dark-skinned as Lee could turn pale, but he was a very unsettling shade of green as he was marched to the jail. I walked with him, my hand on his shoulder, murmuring reassurances. He stared straight ahead, moving like someone in a nightmare. His shoulders seemed turned to stone. I didn't want to imagine what he must have been thinking. St. Rosalind the Just, I prayed, invoking the patron of legal proceedings, protect this innocent. The head jailer was a bald, burly man with a taste for knives. I counted at least 5 on his person without really looking. He was leaning against the outer gate, paring his fingernails with one of them. I stepped out in front of the guards and, hitching my thumbs in my sash in an attempt to look imposing, spoke before anyone else could. Good jailer, this boy you see before you, I indicated Lee, who was trembling and looked as if he might vomit, has been accused in the death of a young lady of his household. These worthy officers, I indicated the guards, have escorted him here to be held until trial. The jailer, an eminently practical man, cut through my speech. And what have you got to do with it, fancy boy? I'm his friend. I don't doubt it. I ignored that, as well as the sniggers of the guards. I have come, I said softly, moving close enough to the jailer that the others could not hear, to make arrangements for the boy to be kept comfortable while he remains in your care. I shook the purse. It gave a satisfying chunk. The jailer grinned. He was missing several teeth and smelt strongly of fish pickle. Come to my office, fancy boy, he said, slapping me on the back. I knew everyone in the city would be saying Lee and I were lovers by nightfall. Not the best outcome. But if I had to endure some gossip to ensure Lee wasn't molested by other prisoners, I'd do it. I arranged to have Lee housed privately, in a tiny windowless cell to be sure, but at least I knew he'd be safe. I'd only given the jailer 1 coin with the understanding that I would visit Lee daily and continue to pay the jailer only so long as the boy was being well treated. At the moment I had money to spare. The coins Nat had given me were whole silvers. Sadie must have been very, very fond of Lee indeed. It's going to be all right, I soothed before I left the boy alone. I'm going to look into a few things. Don't worry, I'll be back later to tell you what I find. And I'm sure Sadie will send someone over with food and clean clothes for you as soon as she can. Lee embraced me fiercely, and then I took my leave. I knew where I had to go and what I had to do that day, but I wasn't sure my stomach was up to it yet. So I went to see Tom and Mags, toiling uphill from the prison to the western quarter of town where craftspeople lived. The streets were still fairly empty, even getting on towards noon. Obviously, the elves and my relations weren't the only people who celebrated St. Michael's by getting intoxicated. I hated to wake the newlyweds, even though it was now past mid-morning, but I wanted my witnesses in line before someone decided to charge me in Allison's death. I knocked on the front door, softly at first, then more forcefully. At length, Tom's head and chest, unclothed, appeared at an upstairs window. "Archangels, Edward, what's going on? If you wanted to roast us out of bed, where are the musicians? Where are the dancing girls? And you haven't changed clothes yet. Say, Dana, just how drunk were you last night?" "I'm not here to celebrate. I need your help. It's a matter of life and death." "Life and death?" repeated Tom. He squinted down at me and said, "You're not joking, are you? I'll be right down." A few minutes later, he opened the front door, wearing a robe I recognized as some of my father's finest linen twill. "What's the matter?" Tom asked. "Is the family all right?" "As far as I know," I said as I entered their downstairs room, "it's Lee." Tom shut the door and frowned at me. "Lee?" "The elf boy. I've been teaching him to read this summer." His expression cleared. "Oh, him. Yes, Margaret told me about him. What's wrong?" I told him as quickly as I could. "Well, that's terrible, Edward," Tom said, "but what do you need from me?" "I'm afraid someone might accuse me of being involved in the murder, since I'm a friend of Lee's. Plus, several months ago, I gave a card reading to the girl's father, and it was far from favorable. And he's dead now, too. So I want you and your friends to vouch that I was with you St. Michael's Eve, if anyone asks." "All night?" he said, brow furrowing. "You left at the first bell. I know, that's all right. There were other people who saw me after that, believe me." "Eddie," called Margaret's voice from the stairs. "Eddie, is that you?" She was wearing a robe even finer than her husband's, and her auburn hair was tumbled about her shoulders. "Good morning, Mags," I said, and I gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. "So why are you here, baby brother?" she asked. "Checking up to see that Tom's not mistreating me?" She hugged him playfully. "I wish so," I said. "I had to ask Tom a favor, and now I've got to go. Goodbye, Mags." "But Eddie," she said, "it must be nearly noon. Can't we give you something to eat or drink?" I shook my head. "No, I've got far too much to do. Besides, I've a nasty chore ahead of me, and I'd rather tackle it on an empty stomach. No, don't ask. You don't want to know. I'll see myself out." I think they were kissing before I'd even closed the door. My next call was rather less pleasant. I needed some special tools and ingredients for a spell, and I knew Cousin Damien would have them. I had to trudge even further uptown, as his home was in the fashionable district north of the temple. The contents of his front window, jar upon jar of herbs and oddities, could be seen through the rippled glass of the window panes. The door was closed. Apparently, Damien thought himself too classy to leave his front door open for customers or flies. I rapped on his shop door. I was certain the shiny, gargoyle-shaped brass knocker had not been there before. Damien opened the door, smartly dressed and neatly brushed. "Great-grandfather of wizards," he exclaimed. "What's happened to you? You look terrible. Did you sleep in that robe?" I avoided the question. "Damien, I've come to buy some materials." "Ah, hangover cure. I've got some right here," he said perkily, moving towards a well-filled shelf. "Are you all out of yours already? I'm surprised." Ducking my head to follow him through the doorway, I fought down the urge to punch him. I kept my voice level. "Damien, that's not why I'm here. A young girl was found murdered yesterday, and a friend of mine has been accused of the crime. I haven't had time to change my clothes." "Ah, who was the girl?" "Allison Tanner." Damien frowned. "Who was she?" "Heir to the head of the Leather Guild. The city guard have accused my friend Lee, an elf and servant in their household, of killing her." "What do you want from me?" Damien did not look pleased to be dragged, however slightly, into this situation. "I think you know. I need to see who killed her. Through her eyes." And you want me to cast the spell? No, Edward, I won't do it. This is no concern of mine. No, I want to buy the supplies. 3 black candles, powdered henbane, mugwort, and a pinch of hemlock. I can do it myself. Are you sure? Damien asked, lifting one fair eyebrow. I remember the one time you watched me work it. Do you really have the stomach for it? I nodded grimly. I've seen a lot since then. I can handle it. Very well, he said, and began looking through stacks of candles and measuring out tiny pinches of dried herbs into folds of parchment. Oh, Edward, he said over his shoulder, a bit of friendly advice? You shouldn't wear quilted robes like that one. It makes you look pudgy. And that portly gentleman look really isn't fashionable for young men these days. He turned to me with the candles and herb packets and his most handsome smile. Just thought you'd like to know. I tightened my sash. You know, it's an amazing talent you have. To make an insult sound like advice, I said, with incredible grace. Before Damien could protest, I continued. I know you despise me. I know you think I'm a disgusting slob, a blot on wizardry and general, and our family in particular. And you know what? I don't care. You don't have to like me. You just have to take my money, give me the herbs, and let me go about my way. But since you mentioned clothes, do you think you could loan me or sell me a shirt? Because I've got to work the spell as soon as possible, obviously, and I'd rather not do it in this. Do you think anything of mine would fit you? He asked, all bland politeness. I stifled a groan. Damien, yes, you're trim and handsome, and I'm a flabby lump. We've established that. Stop wasting my time, and let me know if you've got an old shirt I can use. Oh, I should be able to find something suitable, he said, and went upstairs to look, leaving me holding the spell gear. While he was upstairs, I couldn't resist a quick look through his shop and the sitting room that lay behind it. The shop was very neat and very well stocked, with exotic magical items from across the known world, some of which I'd never seen before outside of books, from polished stones and faceted crystals to sweet-scented flowers in bright colors and bizarre, almost flesh-like shapes. Peeking into one box, I was startled to find a mummified monkey. I knew that had to be costly. He wasn't boasting when he told the family he was doing well. The parlor, though small, was equal in the sumptuousness of its appointments. All the walls were curtained, the floor boasted a thick carpet, and every bench and chair was covered with embroidered cushions. Tired from walking 3/4 of the way uptown, I decided to have a seat. Damien might think me rude, but I did not care. I chose one of the larger benches. The carved chairs looked almost too dainty to be practical. Damien returned in a few minutes and tossed me a silk shirt. Are you sure you want me to take this? I said. It looks rather nice. Perhaps something else? I didn't want to have to pay for it. Oh, no, he said, with the affected air of someone who wants the whole world to know he throws away silk every day. It's old. You can even keep it if you like. I'd rather run through the streets naked than go out in public in Damien's cast-offs, but I didn't say so. Fine. How much do I owe you for the candles and herbs? 6 silvers. I tried not to choke. That was most of Sadie and Nat's bribe money, but I handed it over. Damien, where's your wife? I asked, trying to be polite. Upstairs, resting, he said. You know she's in a delicate condition. You can change here, Edward. As I stripped off my coat and shirt, replacing my worn and much-mended linen with Damien's silk, I caught my cousin giving me sidelong glances and murmuring snide comments just loudly enough for me to hear. I reminded myself I couldn't protect Lee, if I were hung for beating Damien to death. I put my robe back on over my charming cousin's shirt and left, knowing that as sickening as that visit had been, my next stop would be far worse.